Good afternoon, guys. I'm here to share a very important story of mine. This will be concerning my religious journey. So, my religious life has been somewhat what could be described as a massive roller coaster in a lot of ways. What it involved was a quest for the correct answers, being curious, critically thinking, inquisitiveness, and continued questioning. I wasn't always a theistic person. As a matter of fact, it took me a very long time for me to become such. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Nikolai. I'm 21 years old, born in 2004, and I'm from Enola, Pennsylvania, just directly outside of Harrisburg. I grew up in a somewhat religious family. When I was very young, I was taught stories from the Bible, though I was yet to be exposed to an actual Bible. It was merely a children's explanation of some stories within the Bible. When I was taught the events by my mother, I was immensely fascinated by it, though I did have some questions about the parts where God punishes ungodly people. I eschewed the negatives aside and taught myself to see the positive aspect of it, that God was merely only disciplining those who had willfully went against his commandments and abused their free will, and sought to wreak corruption in the land. I was also taken to church quite often when I was around 9 or so years old, although I was yet to have truly understood what religion actually was. I had familiarity with words like heaven and God, but I became familiar with all that later on. For a few short years, spanning from late 2014 to 2018, when I was 10 to 13 years old respectively, I was nearly completely oblivious to religious faith and religion in general. I did and see here words like Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim being said, but never truly understood what those words meant or the significance behind them. I would constantly see articles on how to act in different types of religious centers, but again, was yet to have grasped the true meaning and significance behind them or what religion truly meant. I did remain oblivious to religion for a little bit longer. I still have clear memories of a Pakistani Muslim family who lived in the first house in a neighborhood adjacent to mine, but they have unfortunately since left. And there was a Somali girl who was born a Muslim, and when we were kids, we never actually got along well, and we were constantly at each other's throats in middle school. And finally, in October of 23, I finally got a chance to talk to her over Instagram DMs, and she recognized me immediately. And I told her I converted to Islam, and I apologized to her for how I treated her, and she even apologized to me if it seemed like she came off as rude to me. And from there, we actually ended up becoming very good friends. And these people were the only things I really knew about Islam. And I remember being in homeroom in seventh grade, and we would watch CNN 10 programs. And I remember seeing programs and sometimes radical Muslim groups, most notably ISIS, would be mentioned. And these groups are also one of the only things I really knew about Islam as well. I used to have this rationale that Muslims and Islam were both inherently dangerous and that Muslims deserved zero trust after that sneaky move they pulled on the US in 2001. Yes, I was referring to 9/11. See, that used to be my thinking. That used to be my rationale. Up until I decided to actually do some online research about the faith, plus many different belief systems, their followers, their assertions, history, culture, and various other unique aspects. The exploration of the God of the Israelites, religious music, and a bigger and broader expansion of religious studies in general eventually led me to find faith in the God of the Israelites and, of course, offer worship to him and convert to Christianity somewhere in April or May of 2018 when I was 13, although it was not a straightaway process. I will be willing to admit that at first it was merely out of a fear of a bad outcome in the afterlife, but as time elapsed and offered more worship to God, I found a sense of comfort and safety and belonging in it. And it personally felt great to have someone who is God, watch over me and protect me, and I felt a great sense of reward and guidance from him, and it started to feel really great, and did not feel as afraid as I did earlier in many senses, and made genuine attempts to get closer to God for the correct reasons, not merely because I was scared of going to hell, though while it's something I'm mindful of even as a Muslim, I don't feel that exact same fear of a negative afterlife I felt when I first converted to Christianity. I took some time to reflect on the Bible studies I'd had with my mother many years back, and it all finally came to me. I had somewhat of a better picture of the afterlife, God, the prophets, Bible, and Christianity. I'd spent a good year as a devoted and strong Christian. I remember even taking my Bible with me in middle school, and I would read it at lunch after finishing my meal, and I would just read it in seclusion. And despite being a Christian at that time, I'd taken the time to examine other world religions and what they believed in, which included Hinduism, Buddhism, and of course Islam. These were the first religions I examined, though I did still do study faiths like Judaism and its branches and its aspects, which include the conversion process, the tefillin, tzitzit, which are strings that dangle from their shirt, talit, strimals, mezuzahs, the beit dins, and the mikvahs, just to name a few. But my expansion into Judaism, more specifically Haredi, and many of their denominations, did not transpire until close to my junior and senior years of high school. I examined many different aspects about Islam and Christianity, and even learned a little bit about Shintoism, Baha'i, and the Druze. As time elapsed into my studies, when I arrived at Islam, I googled some known words that are commonly used amongst the Muslim community and some well-known words, which included Muslim and Quran. When I did that, I contemplated just giving up, but changed my mind, and I only wanted to keep digging further. I learned all sorts of different things, such as how it formed, many Arabic words that are used in faith, Hadith, Muhammad, the concept of the God of the Israelites, and how they ended up spreading to the areas they did and still are practiced today. As a result of my examination of Islam, which, spoiler alert, led me to convert to Islam later on, it helped me shatter negative bias, picturing stereotypes and assumptions. I even began listening to nasheeds, which are otherwise known as Islamic folk music, and they are commonly sung in Arabic, Farsi, Turkish, Kurdish, Uyghur, and I'm even seeing an increase in English, French, and even Korean nasheeds, though I was exposed to the Arabic ones at first. As time during my Islamic research passed, I found that I only wanted to keep going further and further. And during my time, I also dropped that mindset I used to believe about them and instead started to love the faith and the people very much, and found myself wanting to get to know them better. I also began to realize just how darn wrong I was about everything I'd believed in the past, and at that time, I still had no intention of actually converting to Islam and was still a Christian at that time. I did still read my Bible as well. I even remember becoming a Christian extremist and would quote Bible verses out of context to justify my hatred towards specific people. And I still reflect on it from time to time, and I realized I was doing none more than using the book as an excuse for extremism. The act of using holy books as sources for extremism is something that's roundly condemned in all religious worldviews, which includes Islam. Finally arriving in the summer of 19, I had taken some time to reflect. I discovered a video that was recommended to me about how to offer a Friday prayer in a masjid. I did some WikiHow research, and one article that pulled me closer than ever before was an article referred to as How to Stop Viewing Islam as a Bad Religion. When I read the whole article, and yes, I'd read from top to bottom and even read the comments section, I was so moved by it, and it really helped me a lot. It was, I'm willing to admit, a factor that sowed the seeds of me wanting to become a Muslim. I examined more articles on WikiHow about Islam and Muslims, and they really helped me a lot. Finally, coming to one day in the summer of 19, I finally decided to get down on my knees, utter the Shahada, which is, there are no other gods but God, and Muhammad is his last prophet and messenger, and accept Islam and become part of the covenant. Ever since then, I've been striving to live by the tenets the best I possibly can and follow it the best I possibly can. I feel like that decision, me converting to Islam, actually strengthened my faith in God, stronger than ever before, I might add. And I'm extremely grateful for that. I strive to pray the 5 prayers to the best of my ability, and not long after converting, I learned the movements and memorized the words to the prayers. It took some time, but finally got the hang of it, and have since been able to recite the salahs from memory, which include Quran verses, what to say when you bend down, prostrate, when you sit up, and the tashahhud and the taslim. I really wish I could say it's easy, but it isn't. Even today, I struggle with doubt about various aspects about God and aspects about Islam, but have actually made genuine attempts to fight it, and have found reliable answers, and that has helped me in an unspeakable way. Even today, I do still struggle with being torn between different belief systems, but have made attempts to wrestle that too. I personally believe that had I not been open to all possibilities and been open-minded, it's possible I could have continued to be a Christian extremist and continued to believe many negative misconceptions about various religions and including Islam. And I even believe that had I not actually taken the time to examine Islam, there's a possibility that I could have ended up becoming a neo-Nazi or a KKK supporter or a neo-Confederate instead. But by God's grace, I did not go down that path and became a devout Muslim instead. And I did and still do continue to study and research many different arguments for the existence of God and theological and philosophical issues that I think I was able to get resolved to my expectations by myself. And through positive evaluation and critical thinking, I've now been a Muslim for 6 years. And it feels like one of the biggest blessings for me. And I've remained steadfast up to and including in the face of the burdens that try to consume me. Part 2. Why I left Christianity. I was an evangelical Christian for the majority of my life, and me becoming a Muslim was both tremendous and terrifying simultaneously. I see it as tremendous because it gave me a legendary opportunity to look at the world from a brand new perspective. And it was also terrifying because I was well aware of the obstacles that I was about to face and the fact that I was leaving behind the culture and the faith I had been raised with for a long time. But I refused to let that interfere with my devotion and steadfastness. When I was contemplating whether or not I would actually become a Muslim, I did also examine how the two faiths interpret Jesus and who God is. I did and still do remember being taught as a kid that Jesus was the Son of God. See, at first I mistakenly asserted that he was like his literal son. I later began to realize that the context of that was that he was an avatar of God. When I drew closer and closer to converting to Islam, I started to regard that as the most ridiculous thing, most falsest thing I've ever heard in all my entire life, in my 21 years of living on this planet. I also learned that Christians assert that Jesus was the human avatar of God, which I was also persuaded could not in any way, shape, or form be correct, because God is the master of everything. The Quran and the Bible both describe him as the master of the universe, self-sufficient, all-powerful, all-seeing, all-understanding, and knowing. And it is true that Jesus did perform miracles. It is true that he was born to a virgin mother, and it's true that he was one of God's great prophets. He was extremely limited as a human. He lived a human life just like me and anybody else, but that did not mean he was not extraordinary. Well, he was extraordinary. That's what makes Jesus a very good prophet. And nothing to me better than God. Even the Bible has made that pretty clear, because the Ten Commandments emphasize that, and even the Quran condemns polytheism because throughout the Quran you will see that it calls polytheism shirk. And I even read about how Daniel was sentenced to a lion's den because he refused to worship King Darius. It is true that Daniel really looked up to Darius, and he was a very good man. That did not make him God in any way. There were 3 men by the name of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they were sentenced to be burned alive because they ignored the command to bow before a golden statue, and they chose to worship God instead. That all over proved the nature of God in his absolute monotheism. In each of the 3 main Abrahamic religions, the way I interpret Jesus is the same way a Christian would interpret Moses, Aaron, or Ishmael. As a Muslim, I see Jesus as someone who, born to a virgin, with the help of Angel Gabriel, performed miracles, a lot of which positively impacted people, and was a messenger sent by God to preach his word, and was overall one of the greatest men to have ever walked the face of the earth. Overall, I feel like Islam gives the most straightforward, most plausible view of who God is, who Jesus is, and who the prophets are. I also assert that Muhammad ibn Abdullah was the last ever prophet sent by God to preach his word one last time and reform it. To summarize, my religious life has been what could be described as a roller coaster in many different aspects. I do hope for one day people will understand my own perspective, and I also have this assertion that peaceful interreligious debate, dialogue, independent and careful research, critical thinking are all strict musts if we are to push past racism, negative stereotypes, negative bias, and bigotry in general. Well, that is about it for today. Thank you all very much for watching. And leave a comment on my video to voice some feedback.